welcome, and as we traditionally do, let's go around the table and have the panel members introduce themselves, and then we'll go to the technical team, starting with Diane.
Diane McKeel from Albemarle County.
Kirk Kiesacker, City of Charlottesville.
Robbie Sadie, Riverbend Development.
Chip Orles with the Planning District and MPO.
Morgan Butler, Southern Environmental Law Center.
VDOT Developer.
Mark Graham, Albemarle County.
Kathy Galvin, Charlottesville City Councilor.
Dave Covington, VDOT, Charlottesville residents.
Sally Surf, Kevin Moore.
Anthony Donald with Michael Baker.
And Paul Friedel with Michael Baker.
And John Lynch, VDOT Culver District.
Very good. So those are all the players here today. We have a pretty aggressive agenda, so I'll try to be moving us along. There's a lot of information to go over. Since we last met, there's been a lot of work done. Most of you were part of the charrette that was very productive and idea-provoking. So we'll start to dive a little bit deeper into the details of the land use and the transportation elements as we try to crystallize things. So as we traditionally do, we'll go over our standard agenda items. The second one is talking about the number of viewers we had via the live stream. And we had 12 at our first meeting in June. We had 26 in the second one. But we didn't have any comments or feedback provided from those. We did have some interaction with the public on a couple of items. Both of them revolve around traffic. You can see the first one here is talking about the impacts on the neighborhoods, and they get down to some pretty specific roadways, and then talking about the estimated impacts on streams and surface waters. Our comment on this is that this is not a traffic impact study. We're not getting down into a real granular level on all these streets. We're going to hit the major ones and talk in generalities there, but we're not doing a deep dive on all the different subdivision streets and so forth. But we are going to assess it to the level of detail we feel is necessary to draw proper conclusions. So I'll leave it at that.
And just for context, both of these comments were received on the website the morning of our last official meeting, so before our last meeting.
Okay, so that adds some context. We can talk about some of this stuff. And then the second comment is a member of the Meadows neighborhood and talking about the traffic impacts through there. And we all know how important that is. In fact, there's a second meeting with them, I believe, 16th.
Yes.
Yeah. 16th. So we'll be going out to them to address their concerns at that time. So those were the two comments. There is that second Meadows neighborhood meeting scheduled for the 16th at the Holiday Inn from 6 to 8. And one of the comments from our last meeting was to make sure that all the maps that we prepared state on it that this is not a rezoning map. It's added some confusion by not having that on there, and that has since been added to everything to add clarity and context to what it is that we're doing. So now we're on to Sal, who's going to kind of catch us up on the study progress and fill us in on what's been developed since the charrette, which is about a month ago. I know Sal and his land use team and Paul and his transportation team have been very, very busy, and I'm sure you're going to like what they have to say or be interested to hear the detail we've gone into. So Sal, thank you. That's now yours.
I'm glad to hear that you're sure they're going to like what we have to say. Comforting. All right, well, good afternoon again. My voice made it through Planning Commission the other night, just barely, so we'll see how we do today. So today we're going to talk about just, again, a little bit more refinement on some of the plans that we've been looking at for a while. I want to go into a little bit of detail on these, and again, really want comments from you as we drill down. We've taken into account some of what we've heard out of the charrette. You may not see some things that you would like to have seen or heard from the charrette too. We can talk about those. But you know, if you squint your eyes, you won't see a lot of difference. But as we go through the land use plans and some other things, you'll see that we're kind of trying to get a little bit more refined. In big picture, we sort of want to get comfortable with the big picture, with the overall framework plan, land use plan, with the understanding that it's going to change, but we have to get to the point where we're generally comfortable with the approach and the direction, so that then we can start to get to that point of saying, asking that question, how do we get there, and what are the first moves and the next moves. So it's, we could sit here for 10 years and try and get it right to where we all agree on anything. That's really not the point. It's to, again, to have a framework for the development and character that works. And one thing we'll talk about a little bit today is, there's a zoning component that has to happen that's not really part of the scope, but it's required to make this work. So there's answers we can't, questions we can't answer relative to these level of documents that get answered at the next level as you go into your development regs and your zoning ordinance and say, okay, here's what we want to make sure happens. So all that said, a couple comments on this one. You note that we've, we're indicating proposed and existing roads, networks. Again, the expectation would be that these don't look exactly like that 10 years from now. The blocks are probably going to be broken up smaller than what they are shown here. So the intent is not to say, this is now a program for roads, let's go get money and build these streets. Again, as development occurs, the market will sort of drive what happens here. If a developer came in tomorrow and said, I want this whole area right here, well, then we would expect that whatever development product comes out of that street network will look a little different. But it should function within the concept of the overall, so that the overall vision still holds together and performs the way that we want. There are no changes. We're using the terminology, nomenclature here on the roads. It essentially is from VDOT and from Places 29. So this doesn't propose any changes to road classifications per se. Now, when Paul and Baker are done with their work, it may be that maybe there's a road that has to get wider, maybe there's roads that are getting smaller, and so we can have that conversation. But right now, we're simply indicating sort of structure, framework, and identifying kind of what's new and what's versus what's existing today.
Say, I want to make a comment I made 2 meetings ago. And this is format, I guess. But it just seems to me that existing roads ought to be solid and proposed roads ought to be dashed, which is the way it is on practically every map that I've ever seen.
Okay.
Not here, but anywhere.
Okay, you'd like to flip those. Okay. And that is actually reversed from the old school of what you learn in drafting and architecture school. It's actually the opposite, topographic maps. But if everyone wants to go that way, I've got no problem.
Well, I just bring it up as a group to decide.
Okay.
It seems it's easier for the public to understand.
Okay. Let's see what else. Talking about block size. Some specific comments. There was commentary about, boy, it would be nice to punch through the Commonwealth somewhere. And it would be. We have a very significant grade change here. You would have to come up and sort of, ride the topo and go left or right, and you probably, you would destroy that slope to make it happen. You'd have retaining walls. So, the issue is what's the value of doing that if we have to tear up that entire hillside there to do it. If you were going to do it, the topo, you could maybe happen in that area, and probably more likely to happen here. And then, you have a very small block structure here. So, again, it's something to continue to be evaluated, but from our initial look at it, based on real topography and everything, we think the likelihood of just showing a line from there to Commonwealth is just probably not real feasible. And you probably wouldn't like the results of how you would get up that 30-foot slope.
You're talking about
Vehicular, yes. So we do have a connection here, pedestrian. Yes.
Pedestrians are already creating their own path.
Correct.
Because I get calls from the neighbors all the time.
Right.
About people trespassing because they're trying to just walk down that way.
Right. And so we're showing a pedestrian connection here. And again, if we could create more, that'd be great.
To have a pedestrian connection would be great.
Well, I guess I'd do my own comment is show more pedestrian connections. That shouldn't pose the same dilemma. It's great.
Right. So we, certainly we could add a couple more of these areas, and maybe just, put another one down here just to show that the desire is to have more connectivity.
There's a huge number of people that live, on the other side of Commonwealth that are trying to get to
Right.
Stonefield and Costco, and they're creating their own paths
Right,
now.
absolutely.
Well,
So-
you may end up with the same problem because of ADA compliance. So grade-wise, you may
Right.
have the same.
Yeah, but if you have one access point that is ADA compliant, you don't have to have all of them.
Yeah.
And it's feasible. I mean, you would have to do the, you know, the Six Flags up and back a little bit and have very long ramps, but it's feasible.
Sal, I'm gonna get parochial again.
Yes, sir.
If you look at the commercial section down at Seminole Square, you've got a tenant with a long-term lease that just spent between $1.5 million and $2 million improving the end cap of that strip center.
Mhm.
And you've got the road going through it. It seems to me you could angle that road a little bit so it misses it. There is room, if you do angle it, to put it down there.
Chuck, is it this one here?
No, down below. Keep coming across, other side.
Go across the
No,
29.
Oh, on Seminole.
yeah, keep coming, come back
Down.
south,
Down.
south,
Below the water.
right there.
Yeah.
Oh, through that little corner there. Okay, I got you.
That road curves now.
Okay, okay. All right. Okay, and we can come back to any of these. And then we're going to hear a little bit later about, just in terms of overall framework, about potential, you know, is there value and what's the feasibility of actually making connectivity here from the hillside extended south to 250. So we'll hear about that a little bit later. So from a land use perspective, again, you know, we can go in and we can have discussion. We want to do that over, you know, is it green or blue or red or green? We want to make sure first it's kind of overall kind of the right direction. But we do want input on sort of proposed land use. A couple things I want to say, and let me go to this next slide. This is just sort of, you know, big picture, some things we've talked about overall. And just to talk about some functional areas, you know, we've shown this as sort of an office bubble. Again, maybe we should call it mixed-use office. I mean, there's some argument for not calling, you know, saying everything should be mixed use. But we see that more as kind of business in terms of not only the existing pattern today, but based on what's happening on the ground today and the institutional uses. So that's sort of the business core there, commercial, neighborhood commercial corner. The residential area we talked about, this is primarily medium high density residential working through the core here, following what generally is on the ground today. Even if those areas redeveloped, they probably feel like they should still be in that medium high density range. We are, again, picking up so that we have continuous residential and it's contiguous to green, natural, open area. And then, of course, we want all the connectivity we can get to those areas. You can see moving east, we've brought more residential into that, again, long-term land use, obviously that being Costco today. And it's with a mixed-use hatch over it. So again, we see bringing residential in there as much as possible. We've already got some of that happening on the ground. We've got hotel uses, which are good compatible uses, no problem there. You know, but again, the thinking as we've been going through this process with you is overall we're sort of condensing the red. And we're condensing the heavy retail commercial areas. Again, we don't have a demand market study to work from right now, but based on the people in this room and just sort of, you know, anecdotal information, that's the feeling. It doesn't mean if something happened here and something, a change were to occur that needed to be red and commercial, would be a problem for the plan. The plan would still hold together if we colored that block red today. And so that's the point of the vision plan and the framework plan that, you know, if this goes from blue to red, that's fine. Because again, you're going to have a zoning ordinance, you're going to have codes that are going to regulate the form, the urban form, the look and character and quality of what happens in that bubble. If all of a sudden the demand for commercial jumps up in the marketplace in this area, fine, the plan can accommodate it. Someone wants to put a chicken rendering plant there, you know, then maybe that's another conversation, a different conversation. So the blue here, you know, business technology, we're going to talk about the nomenclature in a minute. Again, it's a little bit related to what's on the ground today, some of these big existing tenants. But it also, you know, would be a great place to see business and technology and some more office uses, get more daytime employment, population, make this a real employment base. And within the scope of the core area, it feels like that's an appropriate place for those type of uses to occur. We mentioned the retail area, commercial area, which again is hatched with mixed use. So as much as we can get mixed use in there and vertical, that's what we want. The Zan Road proposal certainly would give us some nice connectivity between that, but that becomes the core. So what we're trying to do is cluster commercial, non-residential uses in those areas, make sure we have good accessibility that those tenants need. But you can see we've really kind of brought that clustering into sort of an exaggerated cluster of those uses. Along the east side here, we are proposing that starts to be more residential in nature. Understanding there are recent investments are being made in these places, so we're not talking tomorrow. But the idea here is start clustering residential. If there's more demand for residential, then that makes sense. It also seems to be a really nice play to put residential facing green, which faces residential, back and forth. Now, there's a detail we've had some discussion about, you know, if it's red on the left side of the road, does it need to be red on the right side of the road? And I would say historically there was we used to do land planning that way all the time. The difference now is when you're talking mixed use, it kind of changes the game for a couple of reasons. And what you want to do is somewhat give the development community some flexibility there. Because there are plenty of mixed-use developments now where residential, in fact, Westport building, residential is facing, you know, retail. I looked at a townhouse that faced the loading dock for Trader Joe's and talked to a real estate agent. She said, you know, some people say, no, that's not going to happen. Other people walking in, I mean, I can walk to Trader Joe's, it's great. So it's a little bit of different era. But also remember, in the mixed-use zones, when you get to the code level, you know, this could be ground floor retail on both sides of the street. And residential above, or it could be office, you know, facing office with residential components. So because the colors are different on the map, doesn't mean that you really have necessarily two different things, you know, on either side of the road. So that's what it does. It gives the developer some options, and again, you'll have other controls in your codes to make sure the right things happen and make sure the reform is correct. But it gives you some opportunities. A developer won't build residential here facing commercial if they can't sell those units, if they can't market it to their target demographic. So that's the flexibility you want, but from a quality standpoint, there will be things in your zoning ordinance will make sure that it occurs the way you want it to occur. We've also talked about, you know, the neighborhood commercial here. You know, we're leaning towards maybe just making this all neighborhood commercial, but really this corner doesn't feel so neighborhood commercial. Not only based on what's there today, but, you know, even maybe long term. If you wanted it to be neighborhood commercial, I probably wouldn't push back too much. But that's a pretty big bubble for neighborhood commercial too, in terms of what we're talking about, what kind of uses. And it feels like it could be, you know, good and accessible to the neighborhoods. And so we think that makes sense. One thing we probably need some more discussion on is the blue here. There was conversation of should it be mixed-use residential as opposed to mixed-use office. It doesn't bother me either way. I think, again, the marketplace will dictate a little bit, your codes will control. What you really want is the form of that development to address the road and the public realm in the right way. We know there's an office component in here already. There's some residential. So, I mean, are there strong feelings in the room that should go the other color?
I think it should be the brown
This color right here.
crosshatch because it's a better transition to the single-family detached home.
Behind it, right.
Yeah. And then it already could be of a form, as you say, that would match the opposite side of the street. But it would not be a situation where you have lights on all night long as everyone's working until it's midnight. In a residential zone.
What is the existing use along there now? You've got the...
Yeah, but we're talking about the future.
Yeah, but we're talking about the future, but you got 50 and 100-year buildings. Somebody just spent a whole bunch of money.
Well, it's a
thinking
mixed residential, it doesn't preclude that.
I'm sorry?
A mixed residential doesn't preclude mixed use. It just puts more, it allows residential to be in there.
Well, I have a question about that. Mixed-use residential, to me, causes a little bit of heartburn. If you come down to the bypass, near the 29-250 bypass, and you see that you've got brown on the east side of the, that's right. That's existing commercial office now. As you go north, that's VEPCO, which is bounded by the bypass hydraulic road. I can see no possible way that you would put residential in there at any given time. And it seems to me from a tax perspective, revenue perspective, jobs perspective, that ought to be classified as some sort of commercial use. Now, maybe you can do that by sort of picking up on what Kathy just said, where it says mixed-use residential. Maybe it's mixed-use residential / commercial.
Well, I could see, I mean, I can understand definitely 250 doesn't suggest that it would be a great place for any kind of residential that's exclusively, in fact, that, if anything, that might be a good place for the office institutional, act as a buffer. I mean, the residential pieces and different degrees of residential need transitional zones, is all I'm saying. And yeah, that 250, it does strike me that's not appropriate for.
So,
I mean, there could potentially be a whole building of residential.
right, so even if you go back to the HB 250 study and it had a bunch of different concepts for its corner. So one way of looking at this, I mean, if I gave you that whole bubble to look at and said, what would you do with it? And you started to think of it as a coordinated development, then it might feel more like a coordinated mixed-use development. We have commercial, we have residential, we have office in it. You know, if you look at, say, I want to develop that whole corner in a coordinated.
But I almost see it like a donut. All around the edges with those big roads, there'd be higher intensity, more commercial oriented, whereas in the core would be more residential oriented,
So
less
brown,
intense.
brown core here.
So
and then,
it's, the road infrastructure does have bearing on on the scale and the mix of uses.
it'd be nice to keep residential on the green.
Yeah, I can see that, but maybe it's more like a horseshoe.
Okay. Is that any other
Does
comment
that
on
make
that?
sense with it's open to the green?
Does it matter to you whether that's blue or red? Again, we're trying to be realistic on what the demand is really for commercial retail uses. And again, you can have, remember, you can have commercial and office, you can have office and commercial. So it doesn't preclude either one. Feel better one way or the other?
I think that's fine. I think maybe the issue is more the nomenclature as opposed to the colors.
Right.
And I have said before that when you start putting colors on maps and put lines on maps, you scare the heck out of investors and you scare the heck out of lenders. So what you're trying to do maybe can't be done because of that. And of course, we still have to go to the Planning Commission, still have to go to the council and to the Board of Supervisors for zoning. But it seems to me that those areas that you've got in brown, I mean, that includes Whole Foods. Whole Foods is not a mixed-use residential use.
Not today. But you could certainly in the future have.
Yeah, but I see what Chuck's saying. And that, I mean, again, and it gets down to that, using the street to help you decide what goes where as much as the greenway. And I can see a narrow band of red on both sides of hydraulic that encompasses Whole Foods, and then a band of red or blue along 250 on the edge, and then you leave it residential open all along the Meadow Creek Valley.
Well, you're going to get a lot of
See what I'm
pushback
saying?
you're going to get a lot of pushback from us and from the Pepsi people. I don't mind mixed-use residential because one day I can conceive of that above that creek park. But you've just got a lot of investment in those areas right now. And
Yeah, but how many parcels are on there now? How many people are owning that? I mean, I'm just saying that.
half a dozen, I don't know. No,
So
more than half.
they might be getting still all the development rights if those parcels are straddling these different color zones.
Kathy, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble here, but
Anyway, it's hard to talk and.
let's
and draw.
backtrack. What about adding after the mixed-use residential, just put /office/commercial?
So let's hold that
Leave the
thought.
colors alone.
Hold that thought, because in a
Yeah.
couple slides we'll talk about terminology. Because some of what we're
Yeah.
fighting over is terminology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember, if I draw a color on top of that building right now, they're not going to change anything. They don't leave tomorrow, they aren't being held to doing anything different than what they're doing today.
But I do appreciate where Chuck's going, because when you go to borrow money on that property, that lender's looking at what's the potential for that property, and that,
Right.
that
So the key is,
He's
by
not so
drawing
much
that color,
looking at
that we
that as
just-
he's looking, what happens if a casualty comes?
yes.
And then you become a non-conforming use, and then you have your values really impede.
But by the same token, I don't want the people that are living along Mickey Drive to think that we're removing residential uses either. So, because that's low-income housing. So we've got to keep a designation that indicates residential.
So, if I asked you today, do you think, is there a problem with Whole Foods next to residential today? I don't think
No,
anyone have a
no,
problem.
no.
So in the future, this designation is still, this could allow a renovation of Whole Foods, or Whole Foods could be torn down and a new grocery store could come in and has housing above it. It could be, 10 different forms of development that includes commercial or office that could still exist within that designation.
We're really just saying that it can include residential, is what we're trying to say, right?
That's right.
So
So
it's
you're
really
trying-
just
that's
phrasing
right.
it right. I mean, it's
Exactly.
not.
You're trying to encourage and promote vertical mix of uses or horizontal mix of uses, and allow it, but you're not precluding what a normal developer would want to come in and say, here's what I'd like to do here.
Right.
So I don't view it as being that restrictive. And then again, as you get into your codes at the next level down, it will, require some of those things to happen or not happen. But let's talk about terminology a minute, because that's really the next point, and I wanted to bring that up.
I might add one other thing before we leave that, is in today's market, and it could change, the highest values of land today are primarily residential. That's where most of the demand is. And that could change. That wasn't the case 10 or 15 years ago. It may not be the case 10 or 15 years from now. So I think today, anytime that there's an opportunity to do mixed use, put residential in, anybody that's in the investment business or development business will try to do that.
The other thing let's be careful about is, what is the nature of that stretch of the road right there? Is it different tomorrow than it is today? In terms of, does that road want to have buildings addressing it in a different way than it does today? So there's two ways to do these plans. We can go today, we can pass it around and color everything that is there today that we want to
Well, I think
maintain.
you're begging the question, it has to do with form as much as anything else.
Exactly. Okay, so we can always come back to that. Yeah, this is what you've seen in the past. We've done some tweaking, but one of the things we need to be comfortable with here as we move forward. And again, this isn't a site plan. This isn't say it's going to look just like this. This is sort of a snapshot of what it might feel like with the direction we're going with the land use. But again, I want to point out that this plan is sort of an interim because we're working around a lot of existing buildings. So maybe some direction, whether it comes today or later, we could do a plan where all the gray existing buildings go away and we just pretend they're not there and say, here's what we'd like to look like one day. I've sort of taken a little more conservative approach to say, this shows how we can accomplish some of the things we're talking about, but around some of the existing facilities, which, in the next 20, 30 years certainly may change use. So, there's sort of two approaches. One is just wipe it clean and say, here's a really cool picture of what it looked like. The other is, let's make some assumptions about some things that are here today. They may be gone tomorrow, but just to show how you can start to implement the vision in the short term, realizing there's some things that just aren't going to move today. So, is this a better approach than just wiping it clean and saying, here's what we would do if everybody left tomorrow?
I think
I don't
sorry.
think you want to wipe it clean. It just doesn't make sense.
I just don't know which ones are existing buildings.
All the gray.
Well, I think we're missing
Oh,
one
the
existing.
gray, they're not parking lots, they're buildings?
Oh, no, those are
all
buildings.
Okay.
Those are buildings.
I had it
Sal,
flipped.
we're right in C there, where the Kmart is. We should
Yes.
keep that existing building
You're
as.
talking about existing Kmart.
I think if we have some that are existing buildings and some that aren't, I don't think we should wipe that site clean yet. I
So
don't know.
again,
I mean,
that's a value proposition of, if you want to go as a group and mark up the map and say, here's the ones we keep, here's the ones we don't, we may start a bar fight. But to your point, this is suggesting maybe a development form that might be more in keeping from an urban form that may come out of this process. So again, that's the call, and then we need input from this group. So to your point, yeah, we could leave that existing building like it is today and put parking fields out front. Or we could show a similar program, just oriented on the site differently. So remember, long-term, the vision is, what does this look like at the end of the day? If the vision is, we need buildings to address these streets in a different way, then that's conceptually what we want to show. Realizing that you may not develop it like that today. But the other part of that will be when you get to code level, development regs, when people want to do new development, redevelop, then is this the feel you want? Or do you want the buildings in the back of the parking on the road? That's not a conversation.
No, I think that you do want to create an activated street, which means that you have buildings that are adjacent to the right-of-way instead of parking lots.
Well, I don't think I'm not trying to say we should necessarily keep the whole site like it is now, but it's just, well, I don't know.
No, it's a good point. So again, if you want to direct us to say, well, some of these buildings are expendable right now, conceptually, we're okay if you draw a new block on it, but others we don't want you to touch. Again, we could run that loop for a long time.
What is C now? What is the building that's
So
there?
the Kmart is right here.
The Kmart is gone.
Yeah.
Well, the
So
business is
why-
gone.
The building is, looks like it's depreciated quite a
It's
bit.
a little more complicated than that, but let's, we
It
can.
always is.
I'm not trying to, I totally, I understand what you're saying. Don't get me wrong, but, I just don't wanna.
So, and again, this doesn't hold anyone with plans there to make it look like that at this point in time.
No, I know.
But the question is, as a long-term vision, is this more appropriate, or do you want to do something else? Again, we'll take your direction. We can certainly do it another way.
I wonder why along our main, a nice boulevard that connects to the water feature, why there's any adjacent parking lots. Why aren't we really being aggressive about that being enclosed with buildings, beautiful buildings?
So you're talking about like that one?
And isn't there another one there? Between the two red ones to the south side? Yeah, is that?
No, I'll show you a detail of that too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's not a parking lot?
So this is surface, but we've got a different idea there as well.
Okay.
Sal, is that water feature designed to be a stormwater facility?
It's a
also?
conversation we need to have. So it's in a location that makes sense to be stormwater. But if you, and you probably know, whenever you try and do a stormwater feature as an amenity, and you combine it as a BMP, there are some challenges. It can be done. You just have to engineer it a little bit differently, because it'll tend to take the first flush garbage and trash that comes after a storm. You have to deal with it in a regular BMP pond. You wouldn't worry about it, but in a nice amenity pond like that, you don't want all that stuff.
Seems to me that it would be worthwhile for you all to have a discussion with Crystal Rudewald at the city.
Okay.
There is a big stormwater detention facility behind the buildings that are adjacent to what you're showing there, the current ex-giant building. And, to the extent that you could relocate that facility, if the city's okay with it, that's pretty important to the city's compliance with the Chesapeake Bay regs.
Right. It's a great opportunity.
You can't show that
It's the right location. And as you know, there's a big grade change behind it. We could capture a bunch of water up here at this level, which is what they're doing today.
Yeah.
That'd be really nice.
Yeah. I agree.
So I wonder if on the graphics, to make it read a little more heavy like a figure ground, could you bump up the existing buildings that are to remain to a darker gray so they contrast with the parking lot?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree. I still get lost on it.
I mean, I think if to Robbie's point about the Kmart sign, and by looking at the map, I don't know how many times it's happened, but obviously there's been a decision made on at least one side where the Kmart is to show redevelopment instead of infill. I wonder if we could go to Chuck's idea of the dash being the new, and use a hatch on the buildings that are in the same color scheme, but just hatch the buildings that are, kind of redevelopment versus pure infill on empty lots or empty parking lots or empty space. That would,
What we might do
not
is,
make it too muddy.
what I would do is I would do that as maybe a separate diagrammatic. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it would be interesting, I don't know if by looking at this, is 10% of it is redevelopment of existing buildings having to come down? Or
Now, again,
50%?
that's it's not gonna have any real value because we could sit here and argue about this should be in, this should be out, in terms of, well, you know, if we're doing redeveloping now, why aren't we redeveloping that? Or,
Right.
you know, I look at this and go, boy, I'd rather have a parking deck right in there. So we could do that all day. Again, the idea is not to say, here's specifically what should happen here. It's squint your eyes, look, it's clear that that's more residential than it is today. And that's the intent of the land use plan. And the commercial core is kind of in here. And it's clear that something special is happening.
Right.
That's sort of the intent of the graphic.
So you're trying to illustrate evolution.
What are the tan blocks? Like,
So the lighter ones would be structured parking. So these are generally envisioned as wrapped products. Now you could have something on top of those decks as well, or they could be green roofs. That's what those are.
Let me pause right here and ask a question of the panel. We've got a proposal to change the designation from solid to dash, whether it's existing or future. How much effort is that to change everything from your perspective?
That's not hard to do. What I would say is if we can agree that we may not all agree, we will not all agree on what should be in, what should be out, we could do a companion sort of black and white diagram of, in this scenario, here's how much is new and here's how much is old, so you can just kind of get a sense of what we're talking about.
So what's the panel's sense on switching it or leaving it the way it is? 'Cause
I would switch.
switch. All those in favor of reversing the designation from solid to dashed for existing and future?
That's for the roads, right?
Yeah, road,
For the road. Just for the road.
Oh, okay.
I'm fine.
Yeah, that's not good.
So the group wants to do that?
Hey, Sal, Sal, one more time here. Hydraulic Road is an existing, remain where it is. 29 obviously will remain where it is. The new road that's just been built, what's the name of that road? Hillsdale.
That's the existing
So
line.
Hillsdale will be in. So a statement you're making is we're going to cross 29 at, what's the name of that street? Zen? Yeah, so that's a major statement. So other than that, everything in that space is going to essentially have the same zone, right? It's going to be designated in zoning. That's exactly
In
right.
here?
Yeah.
So from a land use perspective, you know, this is what we're saying occurs. And again, it doesn't necessarily change what's on the ground today. If you want to talk zoning, that's a different conversation. But what we're saying is that overall character and development form of that area, yes, would evolve into something not drastically different than what's happening today. Commercial uses, hotels, we want to interject residential where we can, but it's still primarily the core hub of commercial activity.
Yeah, you're simply designing something for the Kmart site that you think is appropriate, but something may do a 6-story office building.
Exactly.
And we're not worried about that.
That's right.
As long as a designation for the zoning.
And remember, you know, if you talk form-based zoning, those uses really aren't your big concern. What you want is the way the buildings address the street and to create streets here that are addressed by buildings. Streetscape is your biggest public amenity.
But if somebody came along on the Kmart site and did an 8-story hotel, are we going to force them to push something to hydraulic?
If you have an adopted land use plan and you have a code zoning ordinance, basically your code ordinance that says this is the way these areas will develop, it could be that they would have to, again, from an urban form standpoint, they would address the streets in a certain way, whether it was an 8-story hotel or a 2-story.
Well, I guess that's the question for this. Is this group going to weigh in any way in terms of bulk massing height on this? Not in terms of specifics in zoning, but in terms of where can the height go, where does it step down, on any of that? Because otherwise, just giving this diagram to our respective planning staff is not going to give them much direction, I don't think, in terms of how to craft the zoning.
Well, and this would not be sort of an enforcement tool.
Right.
The enforcement tool would be if you change your land use plan, and then the next level down, if you redid your code or did an overlay, which is we'll talk about. And that's that's why, again, I say don't get too nervous about this diagram because it's just sort of what would it feel like if we took this direction. This is sort of that little corner, and Kathy, you might have been talking about, right in here.
Right.
And again, this is just an idea of, we talked about where would a transit station go. And it should be along this spine is what I think we all agree to. Someplace accessible, someplace to energize that core area. So this is an idea, and there's our water feature. We have a lot of residential around here, probably ground floor retail along this spine to activate it. This is a small community hub station concept. And again, now you see a lot of activity here, people that can walk directly into this core area, a lot of activity. I mean, not unlike what's down at the mall and the transit station there. That
So could all of that, which seems really almost like sheds, could all of that actually be a more substantial building?
Yes, so it could actually,
With
one
these
concept.
things, these uses embedded in it.
Yes, so you could do a structured parking with a wrap around it where the transit is built into the structured
To me, that's
parking.
crying out for more mass
Right.
and enclosing of that boulevard.
So we just, some imagery of a small hub like that. It could be this kind of thing, but I actually got an example, I think I have it with me, where it's actually built into a structured parking. It's a high bay, first floor, all the buses operate on that first level. So yeah, absolutely. Again, it's more about what are the opportunities and what could it be. There's 10 different ways we can do it, but the proximity here and the location feels like that might be a good place to do that. This is leading into sort of where we've been going with nomenclature, and densities, intensities, and types. I only have this up because this is an internal document we're using to help feed Paul with some density and intensity numbers to feed into transportation. So if you take the land use plan, these are the same, the colors are a little different, but they're the same active planning areas, and they've got acreages on it. And I bring this up just to point out that the science of coming up with densities and intensities for a build-out is much more art than science. And having looked at this and looked at mixed use for a long time and worked with Urban Lands Institute and APA, it's really interesting. So if I told you, so West Broad Village, kind of a fairly modern, typical mixed use center. If you took that acreage and a number of residential units, what would you think the density of residential is there, dwelling units per acre?
Where is this?
West Broad Village in Richmond. Short Pond.
Oh, Short Pond.
Like 1,800 or something.
I mean, density units per acre.
40.
Oh, I'm thinking people, sorry.
So it's about seven to eight. I've done this before, but I did it again this week. I went through about 15 ULI case studies. And let's say we're talking about mixed-use developments that are 4 or 5 stories high. Almost always 7 to 8 units per acre. That's all you get. Now, if you get Manhattan, you get a big city, that goes way up. But in something that might be of a relevant scale, because remember, you're not putting residential units on top of everything, right? So you're going to do ground floor, retail, office. Some of that won't have any residential component. But of the units where it makes sense to have residential, if you blend that out of the whole size of a project, I looked at 12 of them, did the math, and every one of them came up between 6.5 and 8 units. So now that's somewhat of a market-driven thing. You just can't keep adding residential units if a normal multifamily project is usually in the range of a couple hundred units. In the suburbs, that would be 250. Maybe somewhere else it's 150, 200. So context-sensitive way kind of made that up in terms of density. A is because it depends on certainly the nature of where you are geographically. B, it depends on site configuration. So if I got a 20-acre site and it's square and I give it to Chuck and go, okay, put commercial on it, put housing on top of it, I'm going to come up with a number. If I give him 20 acres and it's 80 feet wide and X long, that's a whole different equation. So you can't just use a chart and go, okay, here's my X number of units per acre. Every site gets the same thing. So when I do these, I don't apply just a standard, here it is. I start with a base, but I actually went into each of those bubble areas and then said, okay, that area, which we're calling mixed use here, you know, it's different than if you gave a developer that area in terms of how much residential product I can get out, or commercial product. So I'm saying all this to kind of give you some background, how we think about these things and what we feed to Paul. You know, the variables, again, the footprints have an impact on density, height assumptions. We've been working under an assumption of maybe 5 stories for this development as a threshold of pain. Is that something that needs more discussion, debate among this group? You want to think about it more?
For your densities here, are you assuming surface parking or structured parking?
So a combination, because I think from a development standpoint, you know, it's not one size fits all. So I actually looked again at each of those bubble areas, you know, Chuck, and said, well, some of those configurations wouldn't lend themselves to structured parking. And this probably isn't a market where you would do structured parking on every development project anyway. So I sort of blended it, basically.
Okay, you can, with structured parking, 4 to 5 stories, and that's sort of where I think you need to be. You go above 5 stories, you're talking about a whole different construction cost and techniques.
Right.
With surface parking, some surface and some structure, you're probably right. With structured parking, your density can be higher than that.
Yes. And so I did that, and I blended it. So, you know, this was an overall mixed-use model, and these are some of the projects I looked at: Burkdale, North Carolina, West Broad, Richmond, Avalon, which is a series of projects in Georgia. And, you know, these are the normal densities we see in suburban models, but again, with structured parking, you can crank those up. 40 units per acre is not hard to get with structured parking on a mixed-use project. But again, I didn't want to put that over all of hydraulic small area plan and say, okay, let's just count 40 units per acre and come up with a zillion units.
Well, and I think, again, we have to be really sensitive about what's going on at the edges and transitioning. I don't think that along Meadow Creek Valley, that the residents across the Meadow Creek Valley are going to want to see 5-story buildings.
Okay.
And I also think along the edges of the Meadows neighborhood. And so I want us to think in terms of transition, in terms of building mass as well.
Now, so
and then, having said that, you know, given the size of the infrastructure on 29, and, you know, let that go 7 stories.
Right. So what I did was what you're saying, blended. I didn't go the most, you know, maximum densities here, and I just sort of played it based on the location of where they are. But when you blend it out, I think some would be higher,
Okay,
some
so
would
this
be
is
less.
blended.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now,
as long as
I pumped the
we're
numbers up.
showing a site section that's kind of crescendoing where you've got the space to do it.
Right. And again, the land use doesn't go into that amount of detail, but I would maybe pump the numbers up a little bit just to give Paul and his group something to run the numbers to see if we crash and fail on the transportation and infrastructure side. And then you can tell me we need to back off somewhere.
So when we finish our work, we eventually send this to the county and to the city, right? And do they start all over again and review what we've given them and make their own decisions?
So I think the decision is that, you know, do we come up with one plan that can be adopted by city and county? Again, it's a conceptual plan, but then you have to immediately dig into the next level of codes. How do you develop codes?
Implementation phase.
To implement. So that's where the teeth is. And this is the squint your eyes. We really hope it looks like this. How do you get there is that next level of code enforcement. All right, so that was maybe too much background, but we're feeding numbers to Paul. I wanted to kind of give you a feel for how we do that. I just typically, historically, after doing this for years, I just don't take national standards and charts and just apply it and say, here you go, because the numbers will be, you know, kind of ridiculous. So this gets to a conversation, and Chuck touched on this and others. I listed, not all of them, but the land uses that are in the city-county documents today, and the ones that we've been using. So the columns are city, county, and proposed plan. The nomenclature only means what we want it to mean. So at some point, we have to decide as a group how many colors and how many names we put on the plan. And then there will be a description of each of those of, you know, what does urban mixed use mean? What does neighborhood commercial mean? And this gets more to your concerns about what does it look like on the ground. I don't think we're going to solve that today, but I think we need to get input from this group in terms of what are the terms and terminology do we use, city terminology, county terminology, do we use new terminology that doesn't exist. We certainly have terms we've used across the country that, you that we can write definitions for. But this again gets back to the conversation we've already started having. What do these things mean, and what can you do? What does that land use permit? So, see a lot of brain kind of blood coming out of your ears and everything. So we'll just kind of keep moving. But we need to have this conversation
Plant that
to
seed.
finish the
Time to
map.
have it today.
And it's a hard one, but it's the reality is I'd rather go more simple, keep the land use categories fairly broad, because again they don't mean as much until you get to the zoning part of the process. I know I'm probably way over, so how much time?
I'll give you 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes, okay. We can come back to this. This isn't much different, but again, we're going to keep making sure we have the connectivity. Everything on the street's got to be multimodal to the extent possible. We're carrying this graphic forward. The heavy lines on the transit, I met with Katie from DRPT, and we kind of went over what an internal network might look like. The bus service out there today, not on all these routes. We certainly, Zan Road would help serve internally. How that works on the ground, and it might be a discussion of some of the one-way routes would be better if they become two-way routes. So, and we have a transit stop location, conceptual. So again, we'll keep refining and working with the transit folks on that, but we want to make sure that, again, conceptually, there's an incentive to enhance transit within the study area. And then we've talked with parks and various folks on open space. The comment here is, remember, the green is either existing or proposed public open space. So don't get concerned that there's not green connection between them all, because the connections in some cases won't be public open space, they'll be paths and trails. So I want to distinguish between, if you put on a land use plan that there's a green open space here, and you adopt that plan, then that has some teeth. You can use that when someone comes in for a site plan. So it might just be on the street or an off the street path like we're showing here. But by and large, we want connectivity between all these green spaces, whether it's through a green space or through some type of multimodal system. We're showing the one green dot here because we understand the city actually has got control or getting control of that. There was conversation, and we had an exhibit previously that had some green dots out in the neighborhood. That was just us looking at topo and parcel maps. We've taken them out because we're generally not proposing changes out in this area. If you feel different, if you've got some specific spots and you want to put a green splotch on there, but the danger in that is that it would want to put connectivity in there. Now we're going down another path. So we just took those off. And then there is a planned connection here already that the city's working on. So we'd always talk about how do we get east across the green divide there. And there is a way to do that, or plans to do that.
Sal, before you leave that, again, early on I said I was a finance guy. It takes me a long time to understand these things. But where you have that water feature that I was talking about before, the green area, you have got a 20-foot change in elevation.
Right.
Ain't gonna work.
Well, we're not going down that hill.
Okay.
We're not proposing doing anything on that slope.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Chuck, it would be green because the green on the slope would be green, but we wouldn't propose any physical change on that.
Yeah, water slide.
Well, that might be fun, the water slide would be.
And then the last thing, and I just brought these in because we just started looking at these internally just to help us think. And this is just a first flush on, we're starting to look at some massing on Zan Road. This one in particular would be looking toward Chuck's water feature.
Towards the
20
foot drop.
But it starts to give us a feel of what 5-story buildings would look like, what that massing would look like.
See, that would work along that for
And then,
sure.
yeah. And then looking the other way, east, and Kurt mentioned, what happens at the end on that end, and we'll pass these around. These are, that's the hotel, and we're proposing sort of, again, mixed use, 5-story on both sides. You see where we have a little bit of leakage there because that's the back of Stonefield today. Now, maybe that could be enhanced vertically or moved toward the road, but that's what it would look like if you did it today. And of course, the buildings on this side are over the Northrop Grumman Sperry property right now. But we think it's helpful just to start to get a sense of, okay, massing, scale, and we'll scan these and put them with the presentation as well. I'm going to stop there.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. You got another couple of slides. Yeah, we're gonna zip right to it. You gonna do it then? All right, so,
Yeah, I mean, we can just do.
we don't need to revisit
Nothing's-
division statements
nothing's
today.
changed
No,
on
no, those are just
Nothing's changed there.
Yeah.
I assume this is the adopted plan as it is today?
Those are just reference for the existing land use.
Yeah, okay, so we're down the road.
We've looked at this before,
Yeah.
the typical section.
Yeah. Okay. So,
And it, maybe just to leave you with a question, is it beyond this meeting and between the meetings, is it possible to get feedback from this group on a couple of things? One would be that nomenclature chart,
yeah,
just some discussion.
I made a note of that, yeah.
And the other would be, we have a rubric, and we can get that to everybody on how the concepts right now are performing against the vision statement. Just, you know, when we go back to vision
Yeah.
statements there, are we doing
That's good.
what we said we did? So maybe if we could get those out to the group, and get some feedback.
Item 4 is just our completed task. You see all the check marks through April. Are you in the minutes?
Yeah, I was driving, I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead. So, we had the screening, and now we're approaching the core area plan, which is what we're talking about today. We're scheduled to have a public meeting on the 23rd at Charlottesville High School, 6 to 8, is that right?
Please. Yeah, that's right.
Yep. Okay, so that's planned for them, and then we move on to small area plan draft a couple weeks after that. And we finalize, and go to commission late September. So
Again, when do we meet? What's our schedule for this room right here? What's our next?
for this room,
Yeah.
we're
When are we
we're back
meeting?
here in 2 weeks.
Yes, we are.
For our next panel meeting, but the night before our panel meeting, we have a public meeting on the 23rd at Charlottesville High School. So, this is just the work that has been completed since we met last. Stuff that's currently going on. I'm going quickly here because I want to get to Paul and his transportation. So, quickly up to transportation update that marries in with what Sal's been doing, so.
Yes, it does.
Gimpy can.
We'll get there eventually. That's, my friend Anthony hurt his knee yesterday, so he's signed to, or I'm happy about that. So, well, thank you. Hello, everybody. When we were in this room together last time, I did have some traffic simulations, some animations that we showed, and we kind of were looking through a paper towel roll at the one intersection, and that was good because we're trying to answer a question that we were all wondering, hey, is this that idea that was floating, might that even work? So that was helpful, but we knew and we said, we got to back up. We got to, zoom out and look at the whole, how things flow together, because if one intersection does something, it affects the next one and things like that. So that's what we've been working on since the last meeting. So we do have a larger view of the study area, what we call the study area. Also wanted to acknowledge that the software or the tools that we used last time when we showed little cars moving on the screen was Synchro, which is just a piece of software like Microsoft Word, but what we're using for the regional, for the area-wide study is called VSIM. It's not important that you know those two words, but the important thing is the software we're using for the regional analysis is a better tool. It's a more sophisticated, more correct, more accurate, more research and development has gone into the algorithms, the coding, the formulas. So it really is quite an impressive tool that's widely accepted in our industry across the world. So what you'll be seeing now will look different. It's not just about how pretty it is, it's more correct. And we need that because we need it to be a useful tool for us to test ideas. What if we do this? What if we do that? So, okay.
When
That's
you
all.
say correct, you mean more representative
More,
of what we can
yeah,
anticipate?
yeah, without digressing too much, how drivers and their vehicles behave and with situation signs and pedestrians and other cars, that's quite a complex thing, like artificial intelligence to try to capture that behavior. And what does someone do when they are in this lane and they're going to need to make a left up there and there's a car right beside them? What do they do? That's the amount of code that has to be written to try to estimate that is complex. So VSIM is better at that, and it's not perfect, but it's better, and that makes it a better tool for us to say, all right, so if we capture that, what if we disallow that turn? You know, we can feel more comfortable with the results. So, okay. So all I have today is we've modeled this area for existing conditions, because you have to do that first. You get the canvas right, you feel good about the canvas, then you put in hypothetical situations like future land use that Sal just talked about, or we build a new intersection differently than it was. But that first things first is existing conditions. So go to the next slide. So before you start playing that, just, you know, like I said, last time we looked just right here, right? So we zoomed out, and this is going to be like a helicopter. When he starts playing it, you'll get in closer and you'll be able to see what's happening. And it'll start over here, and it'll go down to here, and then to here. And so just kind of wait for it. I think it's 4 minutes. And keep in mind that like this particular one you see up top is representative of the existing morning rush hour, let's say. And then the next slide will be a typical weekday afternoon, like PM rush hour. So first will be AM, and the other thing, so go ahead and start playing it, we'll let it go. It's only like 4 minutes or so. So
each one's
about 4 minutes. So, you know, if you look at a particular intersection and you say, it's worse than that, or it's better than that, it may be. And if we had the next 4 minutes, you may see it. So just kind of, you know, give it a little bit of freedom there. But we do want to hear your feedback. And I know you'll probably want to go home and look at this. It's going to be on the website. But if you see something like this cube is more or less than that, we would like to hear that. And because we can make little changes to make it calibrated. So hopefully you can see where we are. There's the bypass in 29, there's Angus. And this is in the morning. So it's going to pan over to...
What month of the year were these counts?
This was very good. It was right before school was out, a few weeks before school was out this year. Yes. First part of April.
Yeah.
So you see a certain amount of queuing back here, and I think he gets back to almost here. It's worse in the PM at that location. You can kind of see the green and the red, like this, that indicates a red signal, and this is about to go green right there. You saw it change color. It's about to move again in a second, but this is with today's roadway elements, today's signals, today's turn lanes, today's traffic.
And that's also including today's Hillsdale.
That's true. That's true. So that's gonna, that will change things as Hillsdale is built out and connected over.
Well, from a highway perspective, is there a problem there? Because from a lake perspective, I don't see any problem.
And which at Hillsdale?
I don't see any problem anywhere. So far.
Well, first off, this is AM, and so PM will be a lot busier.
Some queuing there, heading northbound.
And all those get through on the light.
Oh, and this is sped up so we can look at it for 4 minutes, and you're probably seeing 10 minutes. The cars are moving faster on purpose. We just turned it up so you can see more information without more time.
And one other thing, we're just seeing snippets of the one peak hour, so at some points it may be worse, some points it may be better. We're just getting kind of a small view into what's happening at each intersection as we're doing our little flyby here.
Well, I think it's important to also recognize is that you have modeled an entire hour of the day.
Right.
Based on that traffic information. So this is a 10% or less
right.
than that entire hour.
Right.
Based on this existing traffic, people are familiar with the level of service measure of efficiency. Are any of these intersections that are being shown in the E and F range of level of service?
Yeah.
For the AM?
For-
How do the pictures correlate to level of service?
For the AM portion, the only places we're seeing intersection struggle are 29 hydraulic and 215 hydraulic, and those are at a level of D. So they're
D?
starting, D.
D.
Okay. So they're starting to get there.
They're still,
In the AM.
And then in the PM, hydraulic is, 29 hydraulic is operating at an E.
yeah. So Chuck, that gets to your point, that doesn't look bad, level of service D is the threshold of acceptability. So-
But for an urban area, D is fine.
It's generally
Yeah, you don't,
agreed
they don't show us Georgetown Road at the.
Yeah.
It was in the upper left.
Peak.
Well,
Georgia.
and Hollywood, yeah,
Yeah.
look at West Main Street, I mean, we can't apply these same kind of,
This is just looping.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and go to the PM? Did you want to say
Did
something?
you want to see Georgetown Road?
So,
I think it would be interesting to see Georgetown in the morning, because that's the sort of the 29 bypass.
so Georgetown Road.
Okay, we didn't have a close-up on Georgetown.
Yeah.
We can do a close-up, but we didn't there.
And having watched this model in another handful of iterations, there has been some significant queuing along Georgetown.
Yes.
For bids.
It just didn't show up in that
Yeah.
8 seconds or whatever.
It's northbound to that left turn.
From Barracks toward
Yes.
Hydraulic.
Yeah, that's our conversation. We tried to nail that down.
So
switch
talk-
to PM
Next
next.
slide.
Before we do that, I have a quick question about, you mentioned that you're looking for recommendations regarding calibration.
Yes, that's a very good point. And before you give your thoughts, yes, this, we'll call it preliminary or draft. We already have had some conversations within the study team about, what have you seen out there, what's your personal experience, and we've made some changes. But absolutely, this is a great platform. If you could think of something right now, based on these few minutes.
So hydraulic, approaching from 252, from 252-29, turning left onto 29 south.
So from 250 to 29, turning left.
On Hydraulic.
On
So
hydraulic.
passing in front of
On
Kmart.
hydraulic.
In front of the Kmart,
Yep.
the left turn.
Turning left
This
there.
movement.
So it's much worse in the afternoon, but even in the morning, that queue is typically more than 4 cars, and about 4 is what gets in before, what can go through the light before it turns red.
So very short little phase.
Yeah.
For the left turn, you get that, Anthony? This left turn movement here. In the morning.
In the morning.
Okay,
And
that's
it's
good.
worse in the afternoon.
There are parameters, it's not just lay out the roadway network and then type in the counts. It's not that simple. There are
Sure.
other factors about how quickly people get on the gas when the light turns green, and
Sure.
what do they do when they're confronted with a conflict, and are they timid or are they aggressive, so we want to, so other comments like that, any personal anecdotal experience, it fits in the conversation right now.
Now, in front of, so on 29 south,
Okay,
between hydraulic and the bypass,
yes.
we saw the queue backing up to the driveway of the Holiday Inn where the cut-through is, a little further up.
Yeah, you mean from
A
Angus?
little further up, right there.
Yeah, I remember, I think in the AM, I think I saw it here.
That's right. And it's not unusual for it to be a little bit closer to hydraulic, that the backup
So
is
you get
is
into
there.
Chicken Row right there.
Yes,
Chicken Row is really,
we've been talking
that's a
about,
huge problem.
that's, I'm
Chicken
glad,
Row.
I'm
That's in the city, Kathy, Chicken.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Chicken Row is just awful.
I would say that this is probably,
at least they're organic.
this is probably an ideal
Kentucky
situation.
Fried Chicken is not organic.
This is
Sorry.
probably more of an ideal situation because we don't have all of those individual, so it's kind of like it's a cornfield aside, instead of a set of restaurants. So we want
Yeah.
to capture that. Maybe we'll put a little friction in or lower the speed a little bit to kind of replicate that because we don't have turning movements at every one of those shops. So, but yeah, those
Yeah,
are.
but that whole area through there
But
is
we,
just-
that's exactly the conversation we had,
Right.
Dave and I and others, Chip, so thank you for that. Other things like that before we switch to PM. So good, thank you, Anthony, for making notes. Go ahead and go to the PM. The thing I say about PM, AM's at 7:30 in the morning. It's a lot of it is people going to school or maybe to work more than anything. So I often say in the PM you get everything from the AM plus other things, right? You have people aren't going and buying shoes at 7:30 in the morning. So you've got all of the morning plus other uses, other things that make sense at that time of the day. So it's almost always the case in an area like this, the PM is Yeah.
It functions that well.
You know, one thing that happens with these arterials is there'll be a platoon. This looks really sleepy right here. But when that hydraulic light lets go, all of those cars slow down, and here they come.
Yeah.
So you'll get these pulsing, which is real life. So it might start moving in a second here, but you know, they're gonna just keep stacking up.
Paul, one other thing that we should make everybody aware of is that this model was built with the actual signal timing that is in those signals right now.
It's true. We had good dialogue and files being emailed back and forth of the exact signal timing and coordination. Some of you've heard of, you know, the term coordination.
Now, this is a huge problem with the PM.
Yeah, so you see, like,
Hydraulic,
yeah.
yes.
And I've seen this back all the way up
Absolutely.
to here. And I heard Joel and Dave said there've been signs put up that say, do not block intersection.
Right, especially after that next one.
You know,
Yes.
Yeah.
the other thing there on 250, one of the things, this is capturing a typical, an average.
Yes.
But there's about a 20% of the time where this backs all the way up, going eastbound, all the way back to Barracks.
Right.
And
Yeah.
but people are trying to get onto 229 North or giving up and trying to get onto 29 and go all the way up to Hydraulic, and you'll see
Right.
both lanes eastbound
Yeah.
just totally clogged
And you're
That's
talking about
right.
the PM.
in the PM. That's
Yeah.
fairly it's about 20% of the time, I'd say.
I know, we call that critical flow. When you've got a situation that's at the tipping point, and you introduce one person that's a little slow to get away from the signal or something, and it just causes a ripple effect.
Yep.
Or emergency vehicles using preemption
Yes.
sometimes.
Sometimes it takes 5 minutes for a preempted situation to clear itself, to get back to where it was.
Is that hydraulic and 250 intersection, does that experience a long queue of left turns that actually overflows the storage and blocks the throughway?
Yes.
A lot of times,
Yes,
that's what
it
I'm talking
does,
about,
'cause I get
Craig.
all over it.
About
Yes.
20% of the time in the
And
evening,
that left turn,
it doesn't, it's not
I
just,
thought that's what you
it's
were
not
describing.
E, it's way in the F.
And your being 20% is,
Yeah.
I would say it's probably not a little more than that.
More than that.
but,
Yeah, these, you know,
I live in that area. so-
it gets into the dilemma of do we model typical or the unique, you know, it could be
Yeah,
a
what
football
probability?
game, right? So there are ways with software like this to implement a incident or a thing, something that would trigger such a thing. So we can talk as a group about
Or just a regular Friday,
Yeah.
when we have all the
Yes.
traffic coming in from.
Yeah.
And then if you add a little rain to it.
Good point, because these are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right?
Yeah, so that is not at all,
I know.
as someone who lives at that intersection, for the better part of the day, that is not at all representative of the traffic turning from hydraulic onto the queue is usually greater than 4 cars, about 4 get in, unless somebody's running the light like me. And then backing up from Angus toward hydraulic on 29 going south. It's not unusual to not be able to pull out of the Holiday Inn
Okay, because
parking lot
cars.
because there's standing cars there, not traffic flow, but standing cars there.
And that you described, your PM, and what days?
So it's certainly more intense on Fridays and other event days, like a
Okay.
PJ or something like that. But certainly just regular Friday traffic is greater.
Well, that's a great point.
But even during the week, I don't think that that's representative of a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I think
Even then?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we're making good notes about this, so we can maybe turn some dials, because it's not cheating, this is called calibration. We want it's a computer, it doesn't know anything except what inputs it has. So,
I will just add, because I drive this all the time, and obviously as an engineer, I'm fascinated by it, and tried to find correlations, you know, why is it bad this day?
yes.
And I am stymied. I have no, people aren't rational. That's all I can think
I've
of.
said in conversations like this, if you get at the critical flow, all you do is throw a paper cup out there, and you just have 30 minutes of, that's how sensitive it is. So.
One of the things that I've noticed over the past few years, especially 2.5, 3 years ago, when we were looking at this at the Rio intersection, and we were talking about factors to be applied to the driver characteristics, were they aggressive, were they passive? Charlottesville is rather unique, where you have some really aggressive drivers and you have some really passive drivers. And you have some in between, but usually you're on one end of the spectrum, and that creates a lot of friction.
That speaks volumes about the whole, everything we have. Every issue is like that.
So,
But they're passionate.
Yeah, extremes.
in fact, aggressive about their passionate. So we thank you for your feedback, and you could even next week or tomorrow, if you think of something else, let us know. We'll keep working on this. But the reason this is important, we could all go out this afternoon and go see this ourselves. So the point is, this will be our canvas, because the very next thing we'll do with this will be to take a land use set, not the land use set that Sal talked about, and we will, first things first, you do left foot then right foot. The first thing we'll do is hold the roadway system the way it is, with right foot in Hillsdale, and then implement that land use set and test it, and you're going to see probably some cues. Big, you'll be like, wow. And then we can do two things. We can either try to mitigate that with clever ideas, or we can maybe tone it down, right, as a group. Maybe say not so much retail there, or something. So there are two ways to solve, probably a combination of both. We'll recommend.
But it will be with the new infrastructure piece.
First things first, we'll show it without, if we don't make any changes to make that point, and then we.
Oh, no changes, but with the
with the land use
changes.
changes,
Then you show
not with
okay.
roadway changes.
But when you do that, you have to take out the existing land uses that are to be demolished.
We
And
will.
add your new ones.
We'll make sure we don't double count or undercount. Yes, we'll get we'll get it right. So that would be the next step. You'd want to see that instead of us, because if you make two changes at once, you don't know which one. Kind of. So I don't know. I imagine that queue is going to be more, but it depends. Well, that's what we need to do. That's the process.
Let's go back to the queue where, I was just going to say where Whole Foods is and the bypass, 250 bypass.
Yeah, it's toward the beginning.
Coming off of 250.
A little further
Yeah,
out.
I tell you, it really, come up there by the Whole Foods at 5 o'clock, and I am always way back behind.
Which
Just
direction?
trying to-
Which direction are you
So,
in?
let me look at myself. Okay,
That's
so here's
hydraulic.
hydraulic, we're coming down. The intersection right there, not where Hillsdale comes out, but one
Okay.
down below.
Mickey.
That Mickey,
Yeah.
that, I am often back this way, east, I guess, of Mickey, with traffic just lined up there. And I'm stopped at that intersection trying to let those poor folks out of Mickey,
Do we
rather
have
than blocking up. I mean, that area just,
Do we have a turning movement at Mickey? Did we?
I totally agree with
that
that.
area is, that's not
And that's the area
representative
where
of
we have
that
big
area at
blocks.
5 o'clock in the evening.
Okay.
And,
So
and that was
I'm
a,
there
that was
3
a
times a
very
week.
strong comment from the neighborhood
And
all
living
people
up
have
there.
wanted lights there and
Yeah,
everything else.
Okay.
it backs up all the way from the intersection, the hydraulic and 29
Because, and that
intersection,
is the
all the
street
way
with,
down.
multi-family housing, it's the street with Region 10 clients, the mental health,
And yet,
agency.
Well,
Yes,
this
it's very
is-
somehow or
vulnerable
another
people,
you need to-
children.
This is a great point, because we do, we had to pick which places we get traffic counts, and I think we did not get one there. So therefore,
Yeah.
he threw some volume on there, just some token, but it's probably too low.
But it's just backing up all, from Greenbrier there. You come out of
There's
Greenbrier
not
and
volume coming from it.
you come out of Greenbrier though and get onto hydraulic there, and all of a sudden you're backed up.
Okay, I see.
You're
what you're
talking
saying.
about queuing from 250 back or from 29 back?
I'm caught from 29 back.
In the
Well, would it be
Yeah,
from
in the
29,
evening.
or would it be from?
Okay.
Right.
from
Well, it
Hillsdale
would be
back?
from Hillsdale.
Well, from Hillsdale.
Okay.
Yeah, now the one thing since April I would make sure we note is Hillsdale's already starting to function as a relief valve for for the
They
for
are.
the
People are
hydraulic
using it.
northbound 29.
Yeah.
There's a large number of people who,
Yeah.
and they're learning. They're in the process of learning right now, and it's an increasing number every week of people who are using that as a way to get around the hydraulic 29 intersection.
Especially in the mornings.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that a lot in the mornings.
I do feel like this is too
Yeah, what happens
too
in the
sleepy
afternoon?
for you.
It's gonna be interesting.
Well, they can't cut through because Line Drive doesn't connect.
Okay.
There's no crossover there.
Right.
So you can go toward 29, but you really
Yeah.
can't easily come from it.
Well, these are good comments, and we're gonna take them back. And you know, so one thing I wanted to say is we do want to try to capture each item as much as we can. But there'll be a point where we'll say it's good enough, and here's why. We're going to be focused going forward. We want to see absolutes, but we really are going to be focused on relative change. If we have this option of the land use or this option, what kind of relative change do we see? If we have this intersection improvement or this one's much better than that one. You know, so you'll hear me say it again. Let's focus first on relative change and second on absolute. So there'll be a point where we'll say it's a good enough tool, sharp enough. Let's go. So, but this is good feedback.
Paul, one last thought, and you all may well have already thought about this, but I know some cameras were installed as part of the Route 29 Solutions construction. I think when we went to the facility in Stanton, there were also some cameras on individual intersections. Those might be another tool you could use to calibrate.
Great point. We just yesterday, right, Anthony? When we did the traffic counts, that's done with cameras on telescoping poles, and then it's done back in the office, basically. We've requested that video, so we can do what you just said,
right,
of these intersections.
We also, we have, through the TOC, they have the high resolution stuff, we have it on 511, the cameras that are on the signals.
Yeah.
We can be potentially used together.
Okay, so, the idea is this will be uploaded, and it's embedded in a PowerPoint file. That's all this is PowerPoint. Hopefully anyone who wants to look at it, their computer will be able to play it. You don't have to have these software. So we welcome other questions in the future. But I do have some more slides. Like I said earlier, first things first, we want to get the baseline figured out. And then it's immediately, we've already started this as a group, is to talk about the future, whether it's future land use or future changes to the transportation system. So I thought maybe I'll just take a minute. I forgot I've got this. And just quickly go through what was done back in 03, 04, the recommended or the preferred concept from the 29H250 study. So not that it's right or wrong, but during that process, a series of recommendations were made. So just to kind of remind everybody, because this may be a farming opportunity. Maybe there's some clever things here that we think make sense. So I'm going to go in and zoom in on each of these places, but let's just kind of pick it apart. And again, this is the recommended design from 29H250. It was called Phase 2 because there was a Phase 1 the year before. And yellow is new roadways or rebuilt. And then red is things that are removed, like roads or buildings, okay? But let's zoom in. So that group came up with a quite sophisticated proposed solution at the bypass, okay? So, taking out a lot of ramps, putting in some new ramps. I mean, I can just tell you in short, the root of that was to try to address the weaves. Weaves are very difficult for drivers. They're unsafe. They cause congestion. A weave is when you've got, half of a clover leaf that connects two loops, and you've got that place where someone's coming out, you're trying to get off the road, someone's trying to get on the road. That's a weave. And weaves are difficult, and they cause a lot of problems. And across the country, most professionals agree to not build new weaves and to try to get rid of weaves when you can. So this idea, long story short, was to try to address weaves. Like, here's a weave. See these two removed loops? There's a little weave between it. But without going into the details, this effort was to do other things, like this left turn replaces that loop.
Yeah.
Little tricks. They're tricks like that.
So
So
also
very
a recognition that you're gonna do something with hydraulic, you have to do something with the bypass. And that's something we talked about at the first meeting.
Right. Very good. So, very ambitious idea here. So that's not right or wrong. It's just that was the thinking that a group like this came up with. They had a grade separated idea back in '04 for hydraulic in 29. In that case, with that information, those people, those thought, that analysis, they decided that 29 would go under, which we talked about that as one of the options. So, you know, we've already started to contemplate different ideas for grade separating that, if that's the answer. Here's hydraulic. You know, series of roundabouts and a little additional road here by the Kroger that comes over right in, right out on 29. You know, some clever landscaping ideas, a little traffic calming, make the roads kind of serpentine and have green space. You know, so some interesting, clever ideas there. Hillsdale and Mickey. So let's see what else.
Seems like those roundabouts would have really slowed down that traffic, and given the volume, that I don't see how that would have worked.
It's our job to test things like that.
That makes me think I'm in New Zealand, because that's exactly what you see in New Zealand. One roundabout right after another, and they work. I mean,
so yeah, roundabouts are interesting. They slow people down, but they keep them moving.
That's right.
At the same, you know, it's kind of both. It's
really interesting.
And I've often said roundabouts fit into a certain band of traffic. Below a certain volume, it's not worth spending all that money. Above a certain volume, it's just there's a band.
Right.
So it depends on what we do with land use and everything to decide if we would be in that sweet spot, that Goldilocks spot. So back in '04, at rugby and hydraulic, and you know the north arrow is a little skewed here. And here's the bypass. The decision, the preferred alternative back then was just kind of a traditional widening, traditional lanes. Okay.
But doing away with the left.
Left turn, yeah.
Oh, that's a good point.
yeah.
Eastbound
turn.
left.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, good catch. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. That frees up green time. If you have a fixed amount of green time and you have to give it away, you take one of them out, and that's
That's the one you said, Mark, caused so much trouble.
That's right.
And that's forcing people to use the
That's why
internet.
they have a three-lane
Yes.
left back there.
yes. Good point about what you just said. Is this concept? If I was in an elevator, I had to say, quick, what's it all about? It's kind of investing in 29 is doing the heavy lifting. And so hold on to that thought.
Getting rid of that light would be great.
So where are we now? 29, Holiday, Angus. Yeah, okay. So there's a connection through, and you see these loops being removed, the loop and the ramp that we talked about earlier. But notice what's happening here is that's Hillsdale coming on down.
Yeah.
You see what's happening there? It connects to the bypass, and also an off-ramp from that intersection we just talked about, you know, to come up. So it kind of provides access from the bypass to this area, other than just via hydraulic, if you follow me. So that shows up a little better, a little easier to see. Let me just go back to the big one here. So this is not the first time we've heard this. You know, before we even started this group, I had heard this idea. You know, it had some history to it about somehow connecting. But keep that in mind, because we may be testing something like that. Where was I? Here. Okay, so that was the 29 H250 for us to consider as a set of possible ideas. There's a gentleman that was actually involved in that way back when it was done, working for the county at the time, and he had some clever ideas, and he just shot them to our study team and said, hey, been watching you guys, I've been paying attention to the team, and I had some ideas, I want to share it, see what you think. So I wanted to share it. Again, this is all just food for thought. So it's a conceptual idea, and I'll walk through it like I did the last one. It's just brainstorming. We haven't tested it. We don't know that it will work with whatever land use. So, but there could be some good ideas in here, and I wanted to show it and allow us to chat. So before we zoom in to pieces, some things you see that look familiar. Remember the last thing we just talked about? that connection, that's kind of, that DNA is in there. But notice also that, this has a thing, right? Look at that idea. That's a grade separation there at Hillsdale. It's a little scary and exciting at the same time. This is also a grade separation here, and I'll zoom in on these. So hold on to that thought. Let's look at let's break it down into pieces. So I've got them numbered. I just put these on here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So number 1, where's 1? Right here. So, remember I said 6 minutes ago or something that 29 H250 kind of doubled down on 29 and said, let's let 29, let's help 29 do its work. And let's make hydraulic more, let's calm it down. This is kind of another way to look at it. This is really saying, let's let hydraulic do more work. And so 29 doesn't have to do quite as much, not less, but kind of divide and conquer. So the volume coming from the 64 corridor and headed up this way will use this through movement, and the volume coming from Rugby and further to the east would be more of a right turn. So whenever there's a green signal, a lot of people that need it are getting green time. So it's just a different way to think about it. So it's dividing that demand instead of saying let's fix up 29 as much as possible until it can do it all for us. It's dividing the two. So let's zoom in. So anyway, number 1, improve hydraulic to allow higher capacity for travel from zone 4. And I put my little thing down here again to remind you what X4 was. Number 2, where's number 2? See number 2 down here? Grade separate bypass and hydraulic to improve performance. So this is hard to kind of tell by looking at this, but this is up and the turns are down. So where my finger is lower. So if you come down here and make a left, you go into the shadow of that bridge. You follow me? So you're taking turns. It all used to have to happen in a flat area, and you're grade separating. So, and there's also a through lane, one single through, so you can go east up high. Okay? So
you take the line out.
Yes.
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 Okay. So I know that's maybe hard to get without seeing a three-dimensional picture. It might be hard to get your head wrapped around, but just hopefully that worked. Number 3, where's 3? Up at Hillsdale. Grade separate hydraulic and Hillsdale. Because if we did this, we'd have more volume on hydraulics, so we need to be able to handle it. Maybe it can't be little baby roundabouts. Maybe it needs to be more substantial. So the idea here is hydraulic going over, and this would go, if you took this exit, you go down, 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 and you stop. You could turn and go in. And so there's some movements that are not allowed. You cannot come out here and go this way. You cannot go make this right. So there are a couple of things missing, but it's a higher functioning, doesn't mean better, I mean just, it's, as far as moving traffic, it's a higher functioning idea. Where's number 4? Oh, it's that connector. Extend Hillsdale to intersect with the bypass, and that would be more of a lower speed, local traffic, bikes, peds, because you were kind of giving away the farm on hydraulic as far as getting the work done. Then this would be more of a link that would grid out this area, create more of a grid, and that's where you would have safe, protected travel for non-motorized vehicles. That's the idea there. Number 5. Yeah. Number 5. Remove westbound. Okay. See this ramp? If you brought on Hillsdale and someone's coming out here, they're going faster and faster and faster and faster, they're going to merge with the bypass. You can't have someone then coming right off. That's a weave. Remember the weaves?
Right.
So that's way too short. So that would have to be removed, and that's okay. So the people that used to do this would do this, and they would get to their destinations however they need to. So, number 5 or 6, construct grade. Okay, Mickey up here. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, except this is a vehicular bridge. Because this is more of a high type, high functioning interchange, grade separated here. It would probably be necessary to close Brandywine, and it would stop. It would stop.
Oh, wow.
Right there. It would stop right there. Cul-de-sac, right? And then this is how you get in and out. Okay. So that's now I've even got zoom ins. So just hang on. We'll just hit some of these things one more time. So zooming in here, I kind of talked about this. There's that stub connection. You know, that could be well, it could come all the way to here. You know, but the point is, we wouldn't cut that curve. We would not break the curve there because people are whipping around here at 45 miles per hour or something. So, Brandywine connection height removed and replaced with D. Reconstructed more of a limited access. Things we've already talked about. Let's go to another panel. Oh yeah, this one. So I added these green arrows. Here's a thought. We talked about all this. More of a local road, bike ped. Includes connection with Holiday Drive and other properties as part of the local grid. Here we've got kind of a grid going on here. That these connections don't exist right now. So all of a sudden, a lot of movement can happen behind off of 29 over here. One other thing, weeds are bad, right? So we've still got a weave here between these two loops right here. So we could remove this loop. It makes a little bit more time and travel time for people. We could remove that loop and see the green arrows? We could require that volume to do that. Just a thought. So these are the types of things we need to kick around. So that's just a brainstorm I had when I was looking at this. All right, so that's what this is down here for C. All right, we're almost done. Here is up here at Hillsdale. This concept did involve one more lane. There is a fourth lane in certain spots. It kind of dies with turn lanes, but this would be a continuous fourth lane. Okay. This is hydraulic in 29.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry.
There's Hillsdale. Okay. So A, grade separate hydraulic in Hillsdale. Some turns prohibited, bike ped amenities. 3 lanes provided on hydraulic westbound. See how that's 3 lanes now instead of 2, which it is today. So, and then B is just an additional 4th lane. It's now 3. It goes 3, 4, 3, 4 as you go down, but to make it continuously 4. Yeah. All right. This is my last slide. Then we can talk. I know I've just dominated here, but I said earlier, our next job is to work with, he showed a graphic about land use, and it may be too much, may not, we don't know yet, to work with the land use team to finalize that land use, convert that land use to travel demand, and then test it. We'll show you another video, and it'll be like, ugh, because we'll test it on a network that doesn't have any changes. Then we've got all these ideas floating around we've talked about for months now. What if we did this? What if we did that? That's when we go to alternatives. So that's kind of where we get develop improvement process for distance.
Before we move on, just to remind everybody what we were just looking at, that is an idea or group of ideas that was provided by the public that we wanted to bring to the panel and show you. It's not something we're proposing at this point.
That's a good point.
But as Paul mentioned, there's probably some elements of this overall plan that might make a lot of sense with what we've already talked about. And that's why we're showing it to you today. You deserve to see it.
One question about this, is part of the intent behind this package here that would preclude the need to do any kind of grade separation at 29?
We thought about that, and I think it could be. It's got to be a numbers-driven answer. No one knows, including the author, if we can avoid that if we do this. It's hypothetical. It may be, that'll all be dependent on traffic volume, and which is dependent on land use. So.
And we're opening up a whole can of worms with new roads
Sure.
going into neighborhoods that are already legacy neighborhoods, and we've already had that discussion with the Meadows. I don't think at this time definitely a bicycle pedestrian bridge, perfect. I just don't see how 6 could work.
Okay.
I
Going
don't-
into the neighborhood.
Yeah, I just don't see that that neighborhood would like having a road go into it.
Just to be, just
I
to
don't know
have,
how far that
they
road
would
goes.
still have, I mean, they have a road going in here, it would just be a road going in here. So it's just this, one road switched to one road, if that helps.
So that road's not going beyond that apartment complex? It's not connecting into the larger residential area beyond?
I know it does. I mean, this is Brandywine, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I think
okay.
this just goes over and connects to
You're
Brandywine.
routing the
connects to
Greenbrier
Brandon. Oh, I see.
traffic
That's
through.
all.
Oh, I see, I see. It's not going past Brandon.
No.
Yes,
And that goes, okay, that's all I needed
yes,
to know.
yes.
Gets you
Okay.
into the neighborhood.
All right.
It's just a replacement
This
of
is
that.
such a dangerous.
No, I
place.
agree.
I go in
yeah,
there
no, I'm glad I asked
constantly.
that question
Awful.
because I was concerned that it was going beyond just Brandon.
There are a lot of.
Good point. That would be scary, and that's a whole different question that we would not want to put in that.
And are we funneling much more traffic now down to Rugby?
Could be,
And that
could be.
already has speeding issues and everything else going on in Rugby.
Well, this is basically saying, and right now, people are using Hydraulic Road as a de facto lane.
Right.
As part of that interchange.
Right.
And this is saying, okay, well, what happens if we just say, yeah, let's make it there?
Right.
That's kind of what this is showing.
Basically, and yeah, that's basically what's happening is, so, and then instead of there being so much demand in the through movement here, some of it's here and some of it's here. You're gonna have a right turn movement here anyway. So you have more, oh, by the way, look, so double rights right there. So, you know, the devil's in the numbers of if some of these things are great or not as good or better than we thought. But we wanted to share it, just like Dave said.
If you look at Paul's zoomed in picture, so it's kind of like an element for each slide, and you think, you know, is there some value in this, in the different components of this overall plan that we should talk about?
Well, I think, personally, I think you're the better judge because we have this land use plan that we're gonna try to make work, right? And if you need these additional tools in the toolbox, that would help.
I think that's how
Traffic,
I think that's how we build the alternatives.
Right,
Paul
'cause I
mentioned that
can't-
we
I
start
can't
with
make
the
that call
existing.
right
I agree,
now.
I agree.
Paul mentioned that we start with the existing infrastructure with the future traffic. And then you start to piece these kinds of things
Yeah.
together
Right.
and gradually build it up to where you want to be, but you test them. And they make the network changes in the model so you can see which pieces of these, are, more efficient and
So
which
I don't
ones
mind
aren't.
putting these in the toolbox, I guess.
Yeah, that's all they are right now.
Or
take
taking
them
them out when they don't.
But just let's all keep in mind that we don't want to just take the land use in its intensity and treat it as a constant and then start to kill ourselves trying to figure it. No, we can also lower the land
Exactly.
use too.
Right.
So both of those, we want to meet in the middle.
And will we get a hypothetical build-out number, though, numbers of units, numbers of square footage from the land use?
I want to look at that.
Yes, because we need to see that.
Yeah. And relative to current, I'd want to,
Relative to
I'd want
current,
to see a little
absolutely.
table. Give me a percent change.
All right, Paul, we got about 6 minutes left for you, and we want to get to item 6.
Oh, yeah, there is an item 6.
Yep. And
Which is just a really discussion.
This is kind of where we're headed. We're talking about implementation of whatever the big picture solution is, so we want
Yeah.
to spend a little time.
Sure, I didn't have any prepared remarks, but I can kind of start it up, and then tell me if you're right. What the point here is, we all recognize we're talking about a future condition, a hypothetical future, and there may be a transportation network that's needed for that future condition, but hey, really, we got to get from here to there. What about interim steps? What about phasing? What about making small moves, something we can do in 3 years, and not everything's done in 30? So we do acknowledge and recognize that yeah, we've been talking about living in a SimCity world here, but we also need to deliver answers that are bite-sized and incremental. And does that kind of capture the thought?
And we have to think, what's our end goal from a transportation perspective here? It's to come out of this effort with an application for applications for projects for smart scale evaluation and funding. So that's where we're headed right now. And I think at the end of this, what we need to look at is, okay, which one of these projects, because most of the projects we've looked at so far can stand on their own. The portions of the overall plan that we've looked at, you know, grade separated hydraulic, you can do that by itself. Build a bridge on at Zan, you can do that by itself. Hillsdale South connecting to Angus and crossing, you can do that by itself. So what does it make sense to submit an application for, run that through some scenarios, see how they score, submit that now for a project to be funded for design and construction. It's not like we're sitting around for 4 years waiting on, oh, let's see what the land use, what really develops, and then build a road. That's not the intent of what we're doing.
In that regard, when the funding was suggested and the $10 million was allocated to extending Hillsdale, the idea was that would have some utility.
Yes.
Is there, as part of this study, should we look at that almost as a standalone basis?
I think you should probably look at extending Hillsdale, whether it does or does not connect to 250 bypass, and the extension of Angus, because that's where you get utility.
Can you remind us what the timeline is for that application?
That's a very good question. Last I heard, the applications are due in July.
No, they'll start the process actually next spring in June. And go through a pre-submittal phase, just so, you know, get some idea of what the workload's going to be. But it'll go all the way through August.
But
So it's a 3 to 4 months.
Another important point is we don't have to, let's say we come up with 6 different components. We don't have to have applications for all of those ready next July.
In fact,
Dave was just saying, we probably just put 1 or 2 forward.
In fact, it hurts us if we put
Yes.
too big of a project.
Some of them may not make sense.
The idea of prioritizing these, figuring out
Yeah.
which ones do the most in the short term is going to be
Well,
very
and then
important.
also knowing which one, if we do a loan, will really mess things up.
Yeah. And so we just wanted everybody to be aware that that is where we're headed. That is the intent. It's not the intent to wait or to submit 6 applications in the spring or summer, whatever it may be. It's not the intent. And that's a discussion we should have here collectively.
I want to offer one caution. We've had a lot of emphasis on vehicular, and our vision was multimodal. And if we aren't considering those other modes as part of this, if we're thinking we're going to fit them in after we come with the vehicular solution, my experience is that almost never gives a very good solution. So we need to make sure we're incorporating that into this up front.
Very good point. And we chose VISTA because it has the ability to respond to transit, bike, ped movements mathematically. It can actually not just show how it would look, but actually manage the capacity of us. And so, yes, we are going there.
And every component that we've talked about so far has a pedestrian and bicycle component, and in some cases green components. And then we've also talked about, you know, off-road trails and, you know, shared use paths. So, yeah, every single one of those elements continues to have a bike ped component. Now, when you look at extending Hillsdale South down to the 250 bypass, which is limited access, you have to start thinking about, okay, where's our terminal? Where do we go back to, you know, kind of a limited access type of facility, probably somewhere south of Angus, that Angus connection. So just to clear everything up with regard to that, I think we wanted to just hit that real quick.
Can we go back to where we were an hour ago, and let's make sure we got the takeaways from this meeting?
Yeah, we will. Yeah, before we close.
Well, we're going to do that now?
No, I think we have 1 or 2 other things.
Yeah, we're gonna run through the neighborhood.
Just real quickly, neighborhood outreach plan update. We have held all of the meetings that people were interested in. However, we will be having another meeting with the Meadows
trying to set a date with the Incarnation Parish,
Yes.
who represents, and so conversations today with them. So there's a little bit of movement at least there, but
Okay.
that's it. We do have a meeting that doesn't show, we just scheduled with the Charlottesville Redevelopment
Oh,
and
thank you.
Housing Authority.
Thank you.
Is that
At,
just today?
I'm sorry?
Was that just scheduled today?
Yes, yeah, yes.
Thank you, Chip.
Yeah, it is August 28th at 6,
Where will that be?
City Hall. They were already meeting. And I got to give a big plug to Dale. He has been a huge help with the neighborhood meetings by allowing us to meet at Holiday Inn.
Oh.
It's been a
So who are we interacting with at IRC?
Sheila, I don't know the last name.
So I've gotten a little bit of contact from one of their leaders who has expressed concern. It was one of their applicants who was coming, one of their people who was coming to apply for a position got hit by a car, and they expressed concern about, you know, I'm just surprised that they had a lack of interest, or that they've indicated a lack of interest, because they expressed concern to me on a couple of occasions.
Yeah.
And have you gone through that, was it Tim Wallace with Lena Way? Because he was one of the staunchest advocates for
We've done, I've got a list of people that we've contacted, but this is as recent as this morning
Okay,
with
thank you.
Sheila.
If there is interest, they should contact your office.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So hopefully we'll be able to update that last one with the church
Yes.
incarnation. Fantastic. We were very late in the game here, so we, continue to seek input.
And what we've kind of found, I mean, we have tried to have 2 meetings where we invited all of the leaders together to say, here's what we're doing. You tell us what's the best route, because we know reaching one neighborhood or one group is probably going to be a different method than reaching another. And I'm finding that the further along we are in the process, the more the urgency on their end is becoming. It just didn't seem to be enough information up front to make it seem that this was whether important, or that they thought there was more time, or what. But it's like in the last week, there's been more urgency.
There's a couple dozen attempts, I would say, to get something on the, and we're willing to meet anywhere, anytime, any way.
Right.
It doesn't matter, so we'll continue that. So just looking back at our schedule, a lot of this is old news. We've gone over this before, but just to keep it updated, going through today. So things that have happened since our last meeting. We did have our last official meeting on the 22nd. We held the second charrette on July 13th. Here we are today. We had the Meadows Neighborhood Meeting number 2 on August 16th. Public Information Meeting number 2 on the 23rd, as we discussed earlier. Joint Planning Commission work session. This has kind of been on this schedule for a while. It is August 24th in the AM, and the hydraulic panel meeting on the same day in the PM. Now, I think I ought to just throw it out there that there's been some talk about potentially combining those, having our regularly scheduled meeting and having the Planning Commission members address this group here. But that's not something we have talked about before, so I think it's up to you as the panel to say, yes, we're okay with that, because that would disrupt our regular agenda quite a bit probably. So if we want to have that happen here in front of this group, we want to keep those separate, I'll leave that up to you.
Dave, one other variable, my calendar's correct, we've got the PDAP meeting on the morning of August 24th too, so
True.
I would imagine you're going to be tied up with that, some of
Yeah.
us will be tied up with that.
But from a land use perspective, it's not really VDOT's place to be involved with that. So you're talking about Sal and Chip and, those guys kind of.
So you're saying that, and this is the city and county planning commissions?
Invitation for a joint meeting.
Do they even meet during the day? They usually meet at night.
Well, again, the intent was to get all or as many, just so they could have that direct input.
Yeah.
The way we kind of put it was roll up their sleeves and have a good understanding, have their input heard prior to these going to them for the first time.
No, I agree, I think
Yeah,
that's a really good
September.
move.
Yeah.
I just don't know,
Because
it's
as we.
already August 10th.
Yep.
And
So-
2 weeks isn't enough time for some people to take off time from work, if they don't know about this yet. If they're meeting during the day, right? And that's what I'm thinking.
Or bump it up, could we bump it to later than this,
Maybe make it, yeah.
after this meeting?
Well, look at what we have
That is the joint
after.
review.
You mean after in the day?
Yeah.
Later in the day?
Yeah, just make it later in the, or in the
Oh,
evening.
Later in
Not-
the evening, make it that evening. What day of the week is that?
Thursday.
It's a regular meeting.
I don't have
that's-
any issue with that whatsoever.
So it's
We
not a
just-
day meeting.
Yeah, make it, they usually meet at 6 at our, in the city. I don't know what time yours meets.
6 usually, but on Tuesdays.
Yeah, on Tuesday instead.
So 6 o'clock on Thursday, see if they're available. In which case, and then the other thing we could think about is if we had our meeting pushed back later and we roll into it while we're here with them. It's really.
Well, I don't know that we.
Do we need to
It's
be
up to
with
the
them?
panel if you want
Do
to
we need to be with them?
I just didn't want to disrupt our normal
Okay.
agenda with a
Right.
joint planning commission meeting
Right.
without you saying whether.
We don't need to.
And
I don't think
I would
we-
just say,
okay.
based on today's meeting, we need as much time as we can get
Good, I agree, I mean,
for this panel,
Right, it's
I think.
swimming.
I agree.
Okay.
Okay, so I
maybe
would
look
just
at
say
the-
August 24th
Okay.
at like 6 PM for the joint planning commissions.
Fair enough.
Because they're used to evening meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so beyond that, what we have coming after that is the draft review by the joint planning commission. So they have an opportunity to provide
Right.
input, and then September 12th, they're reviewing the draft.
How are they reviewing the draft if it's not done till the 15th?
Because they're reviewing the draft before the official draft
Right.
is submitted, correct?
The draft before the draft?
Yeah, like, I mean, that's the draft that goes to the board and the city council for consideration.
On the
So,
15th?
Yes.
Well, what's the plan on the,
But we don't have the dates yet when it comes before our respective bodies.
I think we were talking about 28th of September, if I'm not mistaken.
that's
For
right.
the-
That's
for-
waiting, yeah.
you got another date.
For us,
That's us, the
that's
28th.
us.
It's, well, there was a board right at the beginning.
I think it's,
Get back to that's right, it's very,
I'm afraid I have to go.
yeah, we need to speed through this, but
Yeah.
anyway, I believe it's late September
Okay.
where the city council and the board, but I don't have the dates. So we've got a decision, September 29th.
That was when a final plan.
Yeah.
29th.
And then to be determined for county and city.
Okay.
yeah.
So,
Or
move
we
on
need to
from
get
that,
those
upcoming
dates to
task
planning
or area
commission, though, 'cause
plan,
that's
further
tight.
development, and public meeting number 2. And open discussion period. Anybody have anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to discuss? I know we're already a little late.
We'll talk about the takeaway.
Yep, I got
Oh,
this.
yeah.
Let me run down my notes, and then
Okay.
you guys can add to it.
All right.
First one was we were gonna change the line character from solid for proposed and dash for existing. We were gonna reverse those.
Right.
We talked about adding a pedestrian connection to Commonwealth Drive closer to hydraulic up that embankment.
Yeah.
We talked about changing the road curvature through that improved property. We talked about in the northwest quadrant of hydraulic and 250, Kathy's idea of that horseshoe, the change in the mixed-use commercial, leaving the open end of the horseshoe towards hydraulic. We talked about using a darker gray for buildings to contrast it more with the parking lots. We have a little bit of homework. We'll be getting something out to you with regard to the terminology resolution that we need, between the county and the city. And we also were going to get some feedback on the rubric. The Sal held up. We'll get this out to everybody.
Yeah.
We need to see how we're comparing to our mission statement, just as a reality check. So that'll be some homework that will come out. We also talked about assessing traffic on Friday, which seems to be traditionally worse than the Tuesday, Thursday time frame. We added the Charlottesville Redevelopment and Housing Authority neighborhood meeting August 28th from 6 to 8 at City Hall. And we agreed to move the joint planning commission meeting on the 24th from the AM to 6 to 8 PM.
And we were gonna make those adjustments, I guess you're not, to the modeling. Did you mention those? But
Yes.
The ones you already suggested, any others you can have.
Yeah.
So that was my list.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything?
What about the addition of Georgetown Road to the simulation?
It's in there, we can add it to the video.
They just didn't highlight it.
Yeah, it was on the
Okay.
top car.
And did you just talk about Mark's idea of need to be multimodal in our design of all of these road issues?
I mean, that's
Well,
part
that's
of
a
the
given.
core
That's a
of
I think that's a given.
That'll come out,
That's a
that'll
given.
come out in the rubric because that's one of our charges.
I hope
Yeah,
so.
right. It is a given. Well, I mean, we're assuming that's a given, yeah.
My last point is the idea of studying the Hillsdale Extension South as a standalone project. Will that be part of what you all will come back with ultimately?
Well, I think that's for us to decide down the road what gets applied for funding. As this group, we decide, let's do an application as a standalone project for Hillsdale South.
And I guess that'll be dependent upon whether the road design that this group comes up with, based on recommendations, includes that.
That'll be part of Paul's alternative development, what infrastructure improvements handle traffic flow.
That's right.
So
Okay.
that'll be one of the elements.
Would you like to, would you like to see that as part of our improvements? Is that something that we should?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Would you like to see that as part of the overall improvement?
I would. I think
Okay.
that goes back to the 2004 study.
Okay.
And I agree. I think it makes sense because that was part of the request that got this process going too. So I think it would help to justify,
Right.
the bigger
I
picture.
wouldn't disagree.
Okay.
We're good?
Anybody else?
One more thing, I'm still not, because it's important to me, I'm still not clear. Are we trying to get a joint planning commission on the 12th? Is there going to be a plan for them to evaluate something more than what they're supposedly going to talk about on the 24th? Or are we trying to push this off until
We're not
we get
trying to
the
push
plan?
anything off. So their involvement up front, early, then Sal goes and incorporates their comments, a draft is submitted to them for review, and then they consider the final draft.
So
They
2 planning
review-
commission pieces
Yeah.
within
Isn't that
2
right,
weeks?
Sal?
Wow.
Well, the first one is,
Not the-
talking about that 12th, I don't think it's a meeting. It's
Not the 12th,
The 12th is just a submission to them?
Okay,
Yes.
that makes more sense.
So that's a submission, and when are you looking for feedback from them?
Because we have to get it on their schedule. I mean,
Yeah,
we're on
I
top of it.
don't have this on their schedule at all.
Oh, no, and we're on top of that.
So I just need to have a date for feedback.
August
Yeah.
24th is joint planning commission, so they would review from the 12th to the 24th, right?
Well, they would meet on the August 24th.
Going to September 12th.
And then you have the September 12th. Is that when their comments are due from the 24th?
Yes,
Or
well, the disconnect then would be if they got a draft on the 12th,
they get a draft on the 12th?
the 15th, that obviously isn't enough time for them,
No.
for us to do a draft plan with this.
So what are we looking for with the 12th? Are they supposed to be getting comments back? Or is it just to show them what you have? I'm just not understanding the meeting on the 12th.
Jim, what was it, because I think
I-
this was part of your schedule.
Yeah,
for the neighborhood
it seems like, it's been so long ago now, but that the 12th would be the goal of having both commissions together to deliver the draft plan to. No decision to be made, no anything, but to do the formal presentation, if at all possible, in a joint setting. Now, that falls on a City of Charlottesville Planning Commission meeting night. The 12th does. But if
So-
I've been wrong before, but.
So the intent was to lay it out to them and sort through their comments and have revisions done so we could submit the draft 3 days later?
That's interesting though.
Yeah,
There's
again,
two small windows
Yeah.
there. I mean, if we have a meeting on the 24th, and then are we waiting out of that meeting to get comments in order to have something together on the 12th? And there's a 3-day window to get the 15th, so I'm not sure.
Let's get back and think about that.
Yeah, it sounds
Yeah.
like we need to flesh that out.
But you
All
need to
that
flesh
data-
it out pretty quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we are,
Chip, one thing about the 12th of the City Planning Commission, I know that that is a jam-packed meeting. NACA will be on that agenda.
Mhm.
There are a couple of critical slopes issues that got deferred. There's one other thing that I can't remember now, but that's going to be an issue.
We've got to go back for Belmont too.
well, you might need another night. You may need to pick another.
All right, can we go ahead and wrap this meeting
Yeah.
up? And continue that conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thanks,
We're
everybody.
12 minutes over.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys, gals.